Right. Well, I'm not a technocrat, so I will speak from the heart, and we won't worry about the problems with the technology. So thank you very much, everybody, for the opportunity to speak to you this evening. Sorry, I'm going to put on my glasses. God, I can't see, that's too far away. That's all right, I'll sit here. Okay, no, just take it closer to me, that's better. Okay, thank you for the opportunity to speak to you this evening about NOC, general philosophy on land management, and in particular, a journey to net zero, as Bob has kindly identified the talk. I'm going to start with a brief background of the farm, where we are today and how we got there. Some of you may have heard much of this before, and apologies if it's tedious, but I think it's important that you all understand what has got us to where we are today. It wasn't a clear objective to get to net zero at the start. But NOC now comprises 540 hectares, situated on the southern slopes of the NOC Hill, on the eastern edge of Murray, just north of Huntly. Beth and I have farmed the property in partnership since the early 90s, and we have recently taken our daughter Nikki and her fiance Tom into the partnership. The property was purchased in 1923 by Beth's grandfather, and Nikki and Tom will be the fourth generation of the family to manage the property. Our objectives are clear. First, to survive as a business. Secondly, to provide a fair living for us all. And thirdly, to continue to maintain and improve the quality, biodiversity, and amenity of our soils, the landscape, and the habitats on the property, while retaining a mixed farming operation. We have always done that by operating in what is really a fairly traditional way. Interestingly, I recently read an eloquently written report on the farm dated 1957, which noted then that Beth's father, John McNichol, objectives were to strike a balance between cattle and sheep while farming along traditional lines to show willingness to apply new methods and new techniques which modern science had made available. So this is back in 57. Some of you no doubt will remember John and how he went on to develop the farm through the 60s, 70s, and 80s with extensive drainage and land improvement schemes, embracing the evolving science. But he never lost his appreciation for the valuable native areas left undeveloped on the farm and the economics of the opportunity. The economics of the opportunity to improve, in parenthesis there, the area if it didn't add up, then he didn't do it. The vital importance of the science of soil management to the life of NOC has always been critical, and it is reassuring, as some keep telling me, as I approach my twilight years, to realize that over the generations, the general objectives have stayed true. Sustainability, in all senses of the word, is fundamental to our objectives, and we consider ourselves to be primarily managers of the land, and that our responsibility is far greater than simply breeding livestock and growing crops. It is an interesting job because we are experts in nothing, but need to know about our soils, the life and chemistry within. We need knowledge of cattle and sheep, horses, agronomy, forestry, woodland management, wildlife and plant management, people management, bureaucrat management, today sadly a whole science in itself, and of course business management. We still have to survive and make a living. We are perhaps more fortunate than many in that NOC has a great diversity of soil types and habitats. We rise from 130 meters above sea level to 420 meters above sea level, and the soils range from impermeable shallow Tarvis series through to good Tarvis loams with over 500 millimeters of topsoil, and through to shallow Dern type peaty soils on the hill, all grade 3-2 to grade 4. You manage land according to the resources you have. And so today, 40% of NOC is in an arable rotation. 7% is down to permanent pasture, and 20% of NOC is, 20% is in rough grazings. So that's 67% of the whole farm is farmed. Of the 20% in rough grazing, 32 hectares of it is part of the Shieldwood Pastures SSSI, so quite an important biological area. Of the remaining land, 10% is in managed commercial forestry, and the balance almost a quarter of the whole farm is primarily, or the whole area of land is primarily down to nature stroke conservation, call it what you will. But it's not grazed and it's not ploughed. This area includes moorland areas, which we've taken stock of to allow trees to re-establish for 20 or 30 years, and will probably return to sensitive management in time. We also have established amenity woodlands, hedgerows, over 12 kilometres of hedgerows, most of which we've established in the last 30 years, 30 kilometres of dikes, 11 ponds, water margins along all the burns, amenity tree plantings, farm roads and footpaths. So those things account for almost a quarter of the whole farm. Today, we manage the farm organically. The arable land is farmed in rotation with 2 or 3 years crop, and then back into grass clover lays for 5 years. We produce organic barley for the malting industry, and specifically we're involved with 1 or 2 distilleries producing organic malt specifically for those distilleries. And in one case, the malt is producing whiskey, which will be eventually bottled under our name. We also produce barley for our own livestock, and we grow beans and peas, and more recently we've started growing buckwheat as well. We used to grow turnips, but no longer see a place for them in our rotation. We run a herd of suckler cows and breeding ewes. We breed our own replacements. We sell the surplus progeny direct to slaughter. We haven't bought any outside cattle onto the farm since 1996, and no outside sheep since 2019, apart from breeding males. The outer perimeter of the whole farm is biosecure, with double fencings on all the marches. Nock also operates a small livery business with about 18 horses. We produce some electricity for ourselves and the nation. We heat our homes and the grain dryer with home-produced biomass and sell a good quantity of stones each year, mainly for landscaping. So there's a lot going on. So that's the background to the property, just to give you some idea of what the property is today. So I think the important things out of that is well over 30% of it is in trees or certainly not farmed, and the balance of it is farmed in a low input system. Okay, so it's a fairly extensive property. A third of it is not actively farmed in the true sense of the word, and what is farmed is managed organically with no artificial fertilizers or chemical inputs, and has been since 2006. So why the interest in carbon? We'll just go back a wee bit further. We were introduced to the concept of nutrient budgeting in 2002 and began formally completing an annual nutrient budget for the use of nitrogen, phosphate and potash in 2003. We continued doing that for 5 years, a depressing exercise, I have to say, because it showed how much of these nutrients we were wasting. This is in the days before we had decided to go organic. Consistently over that time, only 20% of the nitrogen that came onto the farm from whatever source went off the farm in the form of protein to the abattoirs, maltsters, and sadly the knackery. The rest was either lost to the rivers, volatilized to the atmosphere, or added to the buildup of biomass on the farm. A not dissimilar story was obvious with phosphate and potash, but they are longer-term minerals, so not quite so easy to think through. But still, it was clear that much of what we were buying was being lost, and perhaps more importantly, probably adding to the biological pressures on the wider environment. In the case of nitrogen, on average over 3 years between 2003 and 2005, we were inputting 38.3 tons of nitrogen a year, of which 22 tons came from purchased fertilizer. Our output of nitrogen equivalent was 7.8 tons, so only 80% of which I had paid for about half of it. That information perhaps reassured by the offer of some generous support from Her Majesty's government, persuaded us to try and manage the farm organically. In 2006, we began organic conversion of the whole property. We reduced stock numbers, adopted a strict rotation policy, which meant the cropping area was also reduced. And by 2007, our inputs of nitrogen had reduced to 15.7 tonnes, you recall, from 38.3 tonnes. That our output had also fallen to 2.8 tonne from 7.8. And for those struggling to comprehend the calculation, our output of nitrogen was still 20% of our input. So no change. I gave up nutrient budgeting. Clearly, though, the inputs of nitrogen were obviously reduced by the 22 tonne of nitrogen we'd stopped buying. And what was left was nitrogen that came to the farm through the natural cycles, mainly atmospheric deposition and fixation by legumes. And output, of course, was reduced because we'd reduced stock numbers in the crop area. Profitability, I have to say, improved slightly, and that in itself was a bit of a lesson. As time has gone on, stock numbers in crop area have in fact built up again. And although depositions are constant, our use of legumes will have increased nitrogen inputs accordingly. And I don't know, and although I don't have the wit or the means to measure it, I think it is probably fair enough to believe that the 80%, 20% efficiency figure has improved. In 2009, having given up on monitoring the MP and K in the knowledge that because we were now farming organically, all we were doing was manipulating the natural cycles of these nutrients and thus minimizing our environmental impact, the question of carbon was starting to be discussed. And the reality of food production's use of carbon and its significant contribution to potential problems was becoming a hot topic. After some discussion with the Forestry Commission, they agreed to fund a case study assessment of NOC's carbon footprint, just to give us some idea of where we were all going. I think it was information for them as much as for ourselves. Our local conservation advisor, Steph Ferguson, studied the science as it was evolving then and did the calculations for the property, and concluded that overall we were emitting 921 tonnes of CO2 equivalent, and that the plantations on the place were sequestering about 480 tonne CO2 equivalent. So she stamped us with our first carbon footprint in 2010 of 441 tonnes. Interestingly though, and this was probably the most interesting part of her report, she noted that in 15 years, as the young plantations grew and the recently extended amenity plantings on the Knock Hill accelerated their development, sequestration would increase to 1,100 tonnes by her calculations, offsetting all the farm's emissions. So just trying to get a hold on what soaks up carbon, what produces carbon, and how we might move forward, we found really encouraging. That actually came a bit of a challenge for us, a positive goal to achieve and set us on the road to net zero. And although I'm not sure the term had entered the dictionary at that point. In the intervening years, the science has continued to evolve, as has the farm, to where we are today. And we continued to monitor the footprint calculation, but the systems used have also changed. So it's difficult to compare each calculation that's been done over the years. But the goal was still clear, and our last assessment indicated that emissions are now estimated to be 1,050 tonnes CO2 equivalent, and woodland sequestration is just under 1,400 tonnes of CO2 equivalent. So our carbon footprint is now positive. So I sleep happy, knowing that our little dung heap as a total is not causing the world to heat up and maybe helping to offset somebody else's issues. I fully accept that parts of the enterprise cause the CO2 emissions and other parts utilize it. And some might say, get rid of the causes and we will be even better off. But let us not forget that that is the carbon cycle. And the carbon cycle, along with all the other natural cycles, has delivered us over the millennia the world that we have today. World that we had pre-industrial revolution anyway. In simple terms, ruminants, indeed all animals, have been emitting methane and carbon dioxide to feed plants that in turn feed the animals, and so on. Only one thing has changed in all this time, and I see it I see it, and that is the release of only one thing has changed in all that time as I see it, and that is the release of fossilized carbon. Agriculture, through its use of machines and nitrogen fertilizers, contributes negatively as well. I accept that. But I do not understand how the grazing animal, which is largely what we manage in Scotland, can be so negatively considered in the fight to halt the rising levels of GHG. It looks like we are getting a more standardized approach to monitoring the figures, and hopefully this will become more simplified and ongoing over time, as this will allow us to understand our farms better and continue to tweak and make improvements. Hopefully, in time, we will move away from the hydrocarbon-based energy systems on the farms to systems based on renewable electricity, green hydrogen, or even compressed air, which I think is a system of storing energy for the short term that has been totally neglected. Let us not think that we need to alter the natural cycles of nutrients and minerals to produce food and manage our land sustainably. I think it is more important, perhaps, in the management of land than any other business that we take an holistic approach to our activities. There are always trade-offs, and that is the essence of mixed farming. A land-based business is like an organism that with many interrelated and interdependent parts, and to separate them is not helpful and often misleading. It is also really important moving forward that time and effort is put into educating us all in the carbon science so that we as the practitioners understand the consequences of our choices and do not merely tick boxes to say that we are making efforts to improve the situation and collect our 200 pounds as we pass go, as sadly is so often the case in this day and age. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Roger. That's actually it's really lovely to hear from a farmer telling us about the journey and giving us a message that it can all be done, I think. But anyway, that actually leads on to Pete very nicely, doesn't it? Yep. But recorders, I hope you stop recording whilst we get ready to get Pete's presentation up. This might take a minute or two.